All right, so you want to grow grapes, huh? You've got those awesome guides from West Virginia University and the University of New Hampshire, and let me tell you, they are packed with info.
They really are.
So today, let's dive into those and figure out how to grow some delicious grapes.
You know what's funny about growing grapes? It's kind of this like blend of art and science. You got to learn about the soil and sunlight and pruning and all that stuff.
Yeah,
But you also kind of have to like develop a feel for it,
right.
Like work with nature.
Totally. And speaking of working with nature, let's talk about the different types of grapes that are out there.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I always thought grapes were grapes, like red or green, maybe a few fancy ones you use for wine.
Yeah.
But these guides go into European grapes, American grapes, French hybrids. There's a whole world of grapes out there.
There is. And just like if you're planting any kind of plant, you have to think about the climate. You have to do the same thing with grapes. So your classic European grape, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot,
Yeah.
these are like the divas of the grape world. They want those long, warm growing seasons. So think Mediterranean climates.
Okay, so maybe not the best for my backyard.
Probably not. Now, American varieties, on the other hand, they're the tough ones. So your Concord grapes, for example, they can handle the cold. They're more disease resistant.
Right.
And they give you that classic grapey flavor.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why those are so popular on the East Coast.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like Concord grape jelly. That's a
Yeah.
staple.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got our European grapes, we've got our American grapes. Now, what about those French hybrids? Those sound interesting.
Yeah, they're cool. So they're like, imagine the European grape and the American grape had a baby.
Right.
That's your French hybrid. They're trying to get that complex flavor that you get from your European grapes, but also be like super tough like their American cousins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if you want something a little different, look for Chambourcin, Vital Blanc.
Interesting. So it's like picking the right grape for your personality.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've picked out our grape soulmate. Now what? What's next in our grape growing journey?
All right, so now is when you channel your inner Sherlock Holmes and scope out the perfect spot in your backyard.
Okay.
Obviously, sunlight is super important, but you really want to get to know your yard. So we're talking things like soil pH, drainage,
Bruh.
even which way your yard faces.
Okay, hold on. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Soil pH, drainage, yard direction. This is a lot.
Yeah, well, it's important.
Okay, so what's the deal with this soil pH thing?
All right, so think about Goldilocks rate. Grapes want their soil to be just right. Not too acidic, not too basic, somewhere in between. Around 6.5 is what you want to shoot for, and that's where a soil test is super useful.
Okay.
Because then you know exactly what you're dealing with.
So I need to buy one of those soil test kits.
It's a good investment.
Okay, I'll do it. All right, what about drainage?
Right, so grapes do not like having wet feet.
Okay.
So if you have heavy clay soil, you need to mix in some other stuff to get that drainage working, or else you risk root rot.
Right. And nobody wants that.
No, that does not sound good. Now, you mentioned something about which way my yard faces.
Yeah, so say your yard faces north, that means your vines are going to start growing a little bit later in the spring, right?
Yeah.
Now, you might think that's a bad thing.
Right.
But actually, if you live somewhere that gets late frosts, that's actually a good thing because it's like your vines are sleeping in. They're going to avoid that frost.
Oh, that's actually really smart.
Exactly. It's like building in a snooze button for your plants.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've chosen our grapes. We found the perfect spot in the yard.
Yep.
We tested the soil. It's good. What about actually getting those vines in the ground? Now, I've seen bare root vines and potted vines at the garden center. What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So potted vines, they're ready to go. You buy it and you can plant it right away.
Easy.
But bare root vines, it's a little bit more work.
Right.
But a lot of times they have a much bigger root system.
Oh, interesting.
It's kind of like, do you want to just buy like a bookshelf from the store that's already assembled, or do you want to put it together yourself? You might appreciate it a little more.
I like that analogy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I did hear that you can soak the bare root vines overnight before you plant them.
definitely. Give them a little spa treatment.
Yeah.
It'll help them soak up all those good things in the soil.
Now, when it comes to actually putting them in the ground, is there anything I need to know?
Yeah, so timing is important.
Okay.
You can plant in the fall, you can plant in the spring.
Okay.
Fall is nice because those roots have time to get settled in before it gets cold in the winter.
Yeah.
But if you don't get to it in the fall, spring is totally fine too. Just make sure it's after that last frost.
Right. You don't want to shock them.
Ex-
Now, how far apart should we plant these things?
You want to give them some room to breathe. So I would say at least 8 feet apart for American and hybrid varieties.
Okay.
European varieties, you can probably do like 6, maybe 7 feet apart.
Okay, so we've planted our grape soulmates. They're soaking up the sun.
Nice.
Now what?
Now it's time to build them a support system. Let's talk trellises.
Trellises? Okay, so I have to admit, when I think grapevines, I think of those beautiful arbors, the grapes hanging down.
Right.
But are those always the best option, or are we kind of limiting ourselves if we go that route?
Yeah, they definitely look really nice.
Yeah.
But you're right, they can be a little limiting, especially as those vines get bigger and they start, getting heavier with all those grapes. So it's really important to pick the right trellis system.
Okay, so what are we looking for in a good trellis system?
I like to think of it as like the trellis is like the support system for your plants, right?
Yeah.
It's literally supporting them,
Right.
but it's also helping them get as much sunlight as possible.
Okay.
And it's also helping with airflow, which is going to be really important to prevent diseases.
So it's not just about holding the vines up. It's about creating the best environment for them.
Mm-hmm.
What are our options?
Yeah, you have a couple options. One that a lot of people use that works really well is called the wired trellis.
Okay.
So imagine you have your posts in the ground and then you have these wires strung between them,
Okay.
almost like those parallel bars.
I can picture that.
And your vines are going to grow up along those wires.
Okay, so how many wires are we talking? Is it like the more the better?
You don't need a ton of wires. At least 2 is a good place to start, but one that's about 3 feet off the ground,
Okay.
and another one that's maybe 5 or 6 feet off the ground.
And then as the vines grow, you can add more.
Exactly. You can always add more later.
And I'm guessing those wires are doing more than just, holding the plant up.
Absolutely. So as the vine gets bigger, it gets heavier, right? So the wires are helping to support all that weight,
Okay.
so it doesn't like fall over or break.
Hmm.
But the other thing that's really important is those wires are creating space between the leaves
Okay.
so that air can flow through, which is super important because if the air can't circulate, you can get fungal diseases.
Oh, wow. So it's like giving the plant room to breathe.
Exactly.
Speaking of things that can go wrong, let's talk about pests and diseases. These guides mention some common ones like Japanese beetles and black rot.
Ugh, yeah, those are no fun.
No, they don't sound fun at all.
So those Japanese beetles, they're like little eating machines. They can destroy your plants.
Oh, no.
And then black rot, that's a fungal disease.
Yeah.
And it can actually ruin your grapes. Like they get all shriveled and gross.
So what can we do to protect our plants from these things?
So for Japanese beetles, the best thing to do is just keep an eye out for them.
Okay.
And honestly, if you see them, just pick them off. It sounds kind of tedious, but it actually works.
Yeah, and there's always insecticides if it gets really bad.
Exactly. But it's always better to prevent these problems in the first place.
Right.
And that all comes down to good vineyard hygiene.
Okay, so when we say vineyard hygiene, are we just talking about like keeping the area clean, or is there more to it than that?
So yeah, you definitely want to keep things clean.
Okay.
But it's also about getting rid of anything that could be a hiding spot for pests or diseases.
Oh, okay.
So things like fallen leaves, any debris you see,
Yeah.
even those shriveled grapes that fall on the ground, you want to get rid of all of that.
Oh, wow. So those could actually cause problems for next year's harvest if we leave them there.
Exactly.
So fall cleanup isn't just about, making things look good for the winter. It's actually protecting your plants.
Exactly. It's about setting yourself up for success next year.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so we've talked about trellises, we've talked about pests and diseases. Let's talk about pruning.
Oh, yes.
I feel like that's a word that strikes fear into the hearts of a lot of gardeners.
It can be a little intimidating,
Yeah.
but it's really not as scary as it sounds, especially if you start with a pretty easy system. Like the Gayo method is a good one for beginners.
Okay, so before we get into the Gayo method, why is pruning so important? Are we just trying to keep the plant, from getting too big, or is there more to it than that?
It's definitely about more than just the size of the plant.
Okay.
Really what you're doing when you're pruning is you're helping the plant put its energy in the right places.
Okay.
So you're cutting away some things so that more sunlight can get to the grapes.
Right.
And again, that helps with airflow so you can prevent diseases. And when you do all of that, it actually helps the plant produce better grapes.
So it's about quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Got it.
Mm.
Less leaves, more sunlight, better grapes. All right, so what is this Gayo method? How do we do it?
So basically with this method, every year you're picking a few strong branches, and those are going to be your main branches for growing grapes.
Yeah.
And you're going to cut away all the rest.
Really?
Yeah, so you're cutting away a lot, but trust me, it's going to be much healthier in the long run.
So it seems counterintuitive, but it works.
It does. It seems weird to cut away so much, but it really does help.
So how do we know what to cut and what to keep?
So you're going to look for the one-year-old wood. You can tell by looking at it.
Okay.
And that's where most of your grapes are going to grow from. So you'll cut back to those branches
Mm-hmm.
and leave just a few buds on each one.
Okay, this is where those diagrams in the guides are probably going to be really helpful.
Definitely. It's much easier to understand when you can actually see it.
So I should probably have those handy when I'm actually out there pruning.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to reference those.
Okay, so all this talk about pruning is making me really want to try some of these grapes.
Me too.
How do we know when they're ready to harvest?
That's the big question, right? So a lot of people think it's all about the color of the grape.
Right.
And while that's definitely part of it,
Okay.
it can also be kind of deceiving.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So you're telling me that even if the grapes look nice and plump and purple, they might not be ready?
Yeah, you never know. Some grapes are actually at their best before they're fully colored. And some might look ready based on color, but they actually need a little more time.
So how do we know?
Taste them.
Oh, that's a good view.
Yeah, don't be shy. Just grab a grape and take a bite.
Okay.
You're looking for that perfect balance of sweet and a little bit tart. You'll know when you taste it.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so it's amazing to me how much goes into knowing when to pick a grape.
It is. And it really shows how much goes into growing grapes. It's not as easy as it seems. You have to pay attention to every little detail.
Totally. You really have to get to know your yard and how things grow there.
Exactly. You know, something I noticed in those guides is how much they talk about all the different diseases that grapes can get.
Right.
It's like a whole class on plant diseases.
I know. It was a little overwhelming at first, like, whoa, this is a lot.
Yeah.
But then I realized how important it is to know about this stuff.
Yeah.
Because then you can actually do something about it.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to fix a problem if you know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. One of the diseases they talked about was Phomopsis cane and leaf spot. I've never even heard of that before.
Yeah, what a name, right? It sounds like something you'd get in a jungle somewhere.
I know, but apparently it's a fungus that can get on your grapevines.
Yeah, and it can really do some damage if you don't do anything about it.
So it's something we need to look out for.
Definitely.
So how do we fight this thing?
Well, luckily, there are fungicides you can use that work really well.
Okay.
The key is to use them before it gets bad.
Okay, so like early spring.
Exactly. You want to protect them before those spring rains start.
Right, because that's when this fungus really thrives.
Yeah, it loves that wet weather.
Okay, so it's all about being proactive.
Exactly. And that's where those guides are so helpful. They give you all the info you need to stay ahead of those problems.
They're like our grape growing gurus. It's really cool how just wanting to grow a few grapes in your backyard has led us to all of this information.
I know. It's been quite the journey.
We've learned about soil and sunlight and pruning and diseases and so much more. It's really amazing.
It is. And it just goes to show that growing grapes is both an art and a science.
Well said. So to everyone listening out there, we hope you feel inspired to give grape growing a try.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Experiment a little.
And enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Cheers to that.
Cheers, and happy grape growing.